الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. My name is Sophia, I'm your host. The aim of Let the Quran Speak is to help you gain deeper insights into Muslims and Islam, as it is practiced here and in other parts of the world. In this episode, Truth, Lies, and Politics. Politicians of all stripes are lying blatantly, and it seems to be getting a lot worse recently. Should we simply accept that this is what politics is about? Can religiously motivated individuals contribute to ending the culture of lying? We'll be looking at that shortly. But first, we comment on the continuing saga of Omar Khadr, a Canadian citizen and one of the youngest prisoners held in Guantanamo Bay for a decade. Omar Khadr has now been repatriated in Canada, and analysts are saying he will need help and support to reintegrate into Canadian society and lead a normal life. Do Canadian imams and the larger Muslim community have a role to play? With me to discuss, Brother Shabir Ali, President of the Islamic Information Center. Brother Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
What are your thoughts on Omar Khadr returning to Canada?
Well, I think this was long overdue. Canada is the last of the modern Western countries to have reclaimed their citizens from Guantanamo Bay. Other countries such as Australia and Britain and so on had their citizens moved back to their countries to face the remainder of their sentences in their home countries. And Omar Khadr is unique in this way, in that he's the last to be brought back to his Western country, and he was one of the youngest. He was a child when he was alleged. Well, he's convicted of having committed a felony in a military court. So. We can't only say alleged anymore, but the question is what is to be done with him, and Canada has finally moved in to bring him back to his country. That is a good move, and where do we go from here?
So I guess that's the question now that we want to ask. How can we rehabilitate him and bring him into Canadian society? He will be eligible for parole in a year. I mean, some people have said that he might have been radicalized in Guantanamo Bay, which is ironic because he was put there because he was supposedly radical. So what are your thoughts on what sort of program would be needed? I guess you can speak about this from a religious angle to bring Omar Khadr back into Canadian society. Yes,
before I get to that, if you'll allow, I want to deal with what would be a widespread sort of objection and repugnance that would be felt by many of our Canadian viewers to the very idea of now treating a convicted terrorist as with some kind of compassion or treat him in a way as though we are his benefactors. We want the best for him. To answer to that objection, we should say that when we try to repatriate an individual, we're not looking so much at what the individual has done in the past. The individual has done something in the past, and he has been given a certain penalty to fit that crime, whatever the penalty that has been awarded by the courts. Now, when the individual is ready for parole or for final release after having served his or her sentence, the real question now in terms of all convicted criminals is how do we integrate them back into society, reintegrate them so that they now function as the rest of us, as good citizens, and as those who will contribute to the betterment of society on the whole, and who will not return to crime. So this is the real question before us now. It's not a question of whether this is a person because of his past deserving some special consideration. This is where the real safety of Canadians lie in dealing with the previous convicts. and helping them to integrate into society.
But of course, we don't know for sure whether Omar Khadr still holds to extremist ideology, or if he ever held strongly to it on his own. So we also have to deal with that. That maybe he is capable now of, even now, without the re-education, reintegration of being part of Canadian society.
In fact, I have seen some negative newspaper articles in which it has been suggested that he still holds to his radical views, and that is a scary prospect. But that too has to be balanced with the general need to reintegrate previous convicts. You may have somebody coming out of prison and they have been radicalized within the prison. It may be that somebody went to prison for a minor crime and became a hardened criminal right there in prison. And forget about terrorism for a moment. It could be any type of crime. A person may go in a thief but come out a murderer. And it's not for us to judge the person at that time. When it comes time for his or her release, they are released. And then we do the best we can to help them to avoid crime in the future. So whatever programs are needed to be put in place, whatever educational programs or whatever that will help individuals to find good jobs, to settle in decent families, and to feel that they are welcome back in society. All of these are the social programs that we put in place in order to make sure that we live in a safe environment, and that others are safe to live with us and we to live with them.
Now, some countries, I guess Muslim majority countries, have adopted de-radicalization programs. Saudi Arabia is one of them, Indonesia, many others, where they bring terrorists or extremists and they try and teach them Islam, or the true Islam, or a better version of Islam than the one that they had been practicing throughout their lives. Well, what do you think of that sort of
Yes,
program?
and this is where the role of the imams comes in. The role of the imams then will be to talk to these individuals and help them to understand that Islam is not about violence but about peace. That it is not a Muslim thing to kill non-Muslims. In fact, it will be anti-Muslim to kill civilians. And Muslims should be striving for peace. That is the role of the imams in dealing with the individuals. But more generally, the role of the imams now, it seems to me, should be to study Islam very carefully and realize that we cannot do a cut and paste approach and just simply modify here and modify there. There needs to be a deep rethinking of many of the principles which classical scholars have accepted as givens, but whereas in fact these are not givens as far as the Quran and the life example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, shows. And what has happened in fact is that some of these very principles and approaches are the very principles and approaches which radicals will use to justify their own radical bent and their interpretation, which we will call a misinterpretation of Islam. To give you an example of what typically happens is that you have, for example, in the hadith collections, a wide array of sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or sayings attributed to him. These were collected many generations after his death and put into writing, often depending on a relay chain of authorities. One person told another, who told another, who told another, who told another, until eventually it was written down in the collections that we now have. So in the same collections you will have some sayings that seem to encourage violence and some sayings that encourage peaceful living. So what most of us will do now is we'll go to these passages that encourage peaceful living, we'll highlight these, we'll preach these to the congregations, and we'll assure them that Islam is about peace, and everybody goes away happy.
But it doesn't convince those individuals who see the other side.
True, because what they do is that they go for the other reports, which seem to encourage violence, and they think that we've got it wrong.
So how can we convince them then, if both of these interpretations are present? within the text themselves?
We have to go deeper than the two interpretations, and we have to ask, how did these hadith collections come to be formulated? How were hadiths related from one person to another? What was the environment at the time when the hadiths were being promulgated? And if we see that hadiths have more to do with the later environments than they had to do with the life example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself, then those hadiths are hadiths which should be attributed to the later age and not to the Prophet himself. So you can have a situation where a certain reporter wants to encourage people to do a certain good deed, what he thinks to be a good deed. And so he relates that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said or did something like that to encourage others to do the same. Now, when Muslims lived through civil wars following the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, to justify their own positions within the civil wars and to justify their own acts of violence and their own killing of fellow Muslims, they invented sayings showing that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself took a violent stand. And so we have hadiths which sometimes depict the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as encouraging violence. Whereas on the other hand, you have the hadiths encouraging peace. But how do you know which is which? Well, we take the Quran as a whole and we ask, what does the Quran encourage? And the Quran is very clear that it is a book about peace. The Quran says, "As-sulhu khair," reconciliation is better. In janahu lis-salmi fajnah laha wa tawakkal ala Allah. If they incline towards peace, you also should incline towards peace and put your trust in God. Trust in God.
Do you think this task can be accomplished in our lifetime?
Oh, yes, it can be accomplished, and it's necessary that we do put our heads to this and make it work. Mm-hmm. What we have happening instead is that most people take the lazy approach. They just go to the books which are already written, they find a quick and ready answer, and they just give that as an answer. They go to the standard collections, and they just pick out the traditions that feel good to them. So if somebody wants to preach violence, he finds violent narratives. If somebody wants to preach peace, he finds the peaceful narratives, and there is little work at integrating the whole and going deeper to find out how do we get the two branches like this, violence on the one hand, peace on the other hand. What is the core? The core really is the Quran, and we are trained. People have memorized the entire Quran. People know the Arabic language. These are no secrets to us. We have the tools to set a new paradigm and show that the Quran is our primary document. It is a document about peace. And those traditions which are in harmony with the Quran and show the same peaceful outlook as the Quran itself, those traditions should be accepted. Those scholars in the past and their judgments which are in line with this Quranic view of peace should be accepted. The others have to be brushed aside.
All right, thank you for that, Brother Shabir.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break. When we return. Truth, lies, and politics.